From Austin Film Festival, this is On Story, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers, creators, and filmmakers. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan. This week on Story, we're joined by the screenwriter behind Little Miss Sunshine, Toy Story 3, and Hunger Games: Catching Fire, Michael Arndt.
It seemed as everything had gone wrong and there was no way out of it. And then in one single moment, everything turned around and the best possible thing happened. And so I was like, I want to write an ending like that. And then one day the TV was on and there was this footage of this little child beauty pageant, all these little skinny blonde girls. And I just thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if a little chubby girl got up there and you just thought it was going to be the worst moment of her life, the most humiliating, mortifying fiasco of her life. And then the music came on and she just blew everybody away and started dancing. And I was just like, that's a great ending.
On Story from Austin Film Festival will be back in a moment. Hey, podcast listeners. I'm your host, Barbara Morgan, and you're listening to Austin Film Festival's On Story podcast. This week on Story, we're sitting down for an in-depth conversation with prolific screenwriter Michael Arndt, who will share his wisdom on writing scripts with high stakes, compelling villains, and great endings. Arndt began his screenwriting career on a high when he wrote the script for the family road trip dramedy Little Miss Sunshine. That script earned him the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Next, Arndt wrote the script for Toy Story 3, which was also nominated for an Oscar, this time for Best Adapted Screenplay. Arndt wrote the script for the second installment in the Hunger Games series, The Hunger Games: Catching Fire. A decade later, he co-wrote the script for the prequel film, The Hunger Games: The Battle of Songbirds and Snakes. Arndt also co-wrote the script for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Arndt's website, pandemoniuminc.com, hosts educational tools for writers, including the full scripts for Little Miss Sunshine and Toy Story 3, and his video seminars on beginnings, setting a story in motion, and endings, the good, the bad, and the insanely great. AFF moderator Erin Halligan-Clare sat down with Michael Arndt for a conversation on story structure, beginning with his advice for creating high stakes and writing great endings. But before we jump to the end, we recommend you follow On Story wherever you get your podcasts. Whether your main character is trying to lead a revolution, win a beauty pageant, escape a trash incinerator, or defeat the First Order, our guests are here to help you keep your audience on the edge of their seats all the way to the last page.
You debuted your endings lecture at AFF some years ago, The Good, the Bad, and the Insanely Great. And I thought we would just start with you kind of defining what the distinction is between those three, and with Little Miss Sunshine and Toy Story 3, knowing that you were really headed toward moving your way through breaking the stories with the ending in mind, how you kind of harness that into creating two insanely great endings.
I'll just tell you the story about writing Little Miss Sunshine, which is I had written like 5 or 6 scripts that had sort of downbeat endings, and they just weren't working and nobody was interested. And it was for screenplay number 6, and I was like, you know what? This time I'm going to write a happy ending, but I'm not just going to write any ordinary happy ending. I'm going to write the happiest fucking ending of all time. My goal was I'm going to drive the audience insane with happiness. That was my goal. And so I was thinking about that. I was thinking, what are my favorite endings? Like, what are the endings that I love? Like, the endings that blew my mind when I first saw them. And I remember being 10 years old and seeing the Bad News Bears, the original Bad News Bears. And that's a great fucking ending. And things like The Sting. And their endings, what I realized was that they were endings in which it seemed as though the worst possible thing had happened. It seemed as like everything had gone wrong and there was no way out of it. And then in one single moment, like everything turned around and the best possible thing happened. And so I was like, that's the kind of ending I want to write. I want to write an ending like that, like the Bad News Bears, like The Sting. And so then I was just thinking like, okay, how? Like, where is that? How do you do that? And then, one day the TV was on and there was this footage of this little child beauty pageant and all these little skinny blonde girls. And I just thought to myself, I mean, this is where do ideas come from? I just thought, wouldn't it be great if a little chubby girl got up there and you just thought it was going to be the worst moment of her life, the most humiliating, mortifying fiasco of her life.
Is he here? Where's your grandpa right now?
In the trunk of our car.
Okay, well, take it away, Olive.
And then the music came on and she just blew everybody away and started dancing.
Get your daughter off this stage!
And I was just like, that's a great ending. Like, I know that's a great ending. Like, I'm willing to bet the next 2 years of my life that's a great ending.
Yeah! All right!
So then the question becomes, like, who is this little girl? What is this pageant? How did she get there? And I had sort of been thinking about a family road trip movie, but I didn't have an end to it. So I just sort of took, my this ending and married it to my family road trip movie, and that, two great taste great together. And so that was Little Miss Sunshine. And I thought it was very uncommercial. I thought nobody's going to care about this movie, but I wrote it to be super low budget. I thought I was going to film it all with a camcorder for like $10,000. So that was it. And I think that the thing that I used for both the ending of Little Miss Sunshine and Toy Story 3 was that, and I think that I remember talking to my nephew about Star Wars, and I was going on and on how about great Star Wars is. And my nephew, who was like 10 years old at the time, was like, yeah, Uncle Mike, but it's so boring. The good guys are going to win in the end. Like, he was completely unsurprised that like Luke was able to blow up the Death Star. The way you get around like the win-lose, either the good guy's going to win or the villain's going to win, is you want to set up a false binary, right? So in Little Miss Sunshine, you go either Olive is going to win the beauty pageant, which you kind of don't believe in, is a little cheesy, or she's going to lose the beauty pageant, and that's going to like feel terrible, right? But you want to corral the audience's expectations, so you think those are your only two options, right? And then you open up door number 3, which nobody saw coming, right? Which is going, fuck you, and just like doing her dance and having fun. It was the same with Toy Story 3, was you're leading the audience to expect that either Woody's going to go in the attic with the other toys, or he's going to go to college with Andy, right? And you just set it up so those are the two options you think are going to happen, right? And neither one of them is great. You kind of want Woody to stay with his friends, the toys. You kind of want him to go to college with Andy, but he can't have both. And then you open up door number 3, right? Which is like Andy's going to donate all these toys to this little girl named Bonnie.
Look, everyone, it's nice here, I admit. But we need to go home.
We can have a whole new life here, Woody. A chance to make kids happy again.
Why don't you stay? Yeah, Woody, stay with us.
Come on, Woodstock.
Get played with.
Can't.
Stay
No,
here. You
no,
can make a new
guys,
kid
really,
happy.
no. I have a kid. You have a kid. Andy. And if he wants us at college or in the attic, well, then our job is to be there for him. Now, I'm going home. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome. Come on, Buzz.
Our mission with Andy's complete, Woody.
What?
And what's important now is we stay together.
We wouldn't even be together if it weren't for Andy. Look under your boot, Buzz. You too, Jesse. Whose name is written there?
Maybe Andy doesn't care about us anymore.
Of course he does. He cares about all of you. He was putting you in the attic. I saw. You can't just turn your back on him now.
Woody, wake up. It's over. Andy is all grown up.
So again, you're asking me about endings and where I came up with these things. It was a deliberate strategy, A, to have that sudden reversal happen at the end, and then B, to set up a set of false expectations so you think there's only a binary choice, and then you open up a third door that your audience didn't know was there. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, and C, watch really trashy TV, beauty pageants.
Yeah. You get good ideas from anywhere.
I'm curious about this element of surprise, like what you feel like that's satisfying to us, like in our own humanity, where you're kind of bucking the expectations, and still having this like insanely great feel good or whatever it is, even with the tragedy, like what it is that the surprise does for us from that catharsis standpoint.
Yeah, I think that your ending is so important because, a lot of times it's like it's the punchline to a joke, right? The setup to a joke is creating this tension, right? And you don't know where the joke is going, and when you get to the end, suddenly everything makes sense. The logic of the joke is revealed, and you get a payoff. Hopefully, people laugh, like it's funny. But I think a lot of times a story works in the same way. Like storytelling to some degree is this sort of dance of the seven veils, where nothing is more boring than a film that's sort of plodding towards a predictable outcome, right? So what you're really trying to do is a lot of times just distract from what the ultimate outcome is going to be. And so I remember on Toy Story 3, Andrew Stent was like, she's going to end up with Bonnie in Bonnie's bedroom, so we've got to make that feel like an obstacle. We've got to make it feel like it's not going to be an eventuality. So, Yeah, I think that, I just got completely obsessed with endings because I was a script reader. I used to read scripts for a living, and just over and over again, this in my endings video, I just saw stories just kind of fall apart at the end. And the thing that became very important to me was this notion of the philosophical stakes, that there were obviously an external set of stakes and an internal set of stakes. But then the question was, it's not just enough for your hero to get what they want or to win or to fail to get what they want, but the question is why? Like, why did they get what they want, or why did they fail to get what they want? And that's where I felt like there was this other third set of stakes that people weren't really talking about. And that's why I wanted to make that video.
Can you define those for us, the external, internal philosophical stakes, and where, within the story you're kind of considering these as act breaks, especially as you're moving toward the ending and the climax?
Yeah, it came from Tip of the Hat, this book called Writing Screenplays That Sell by a guy named Michael Hague, I think is how you pronounce his name, Hauge. And he was the guy who talked about external stakes and internal stakes. But essentially, your external stakes, this is in my endings video, is something out in the real world, something outside your hero that you put at stake. And the important thing is that it's a binary pass-fail thing. You're going to either win the heavyweight championship of the world, or you're going to lose it. Like, it's just something that's out in the outside world. The internal stakes are the emotional stakes of the story. It can be romantic love, it can be parental love, it can be self-respect, but you're going to put something at stake. And again, it's got to be a pass-fail thing. It's like you're either Elaine Robinson is going to run away with Ben Braddock or get married to Carl, the makeout king of the fraternity. But it's got to be this sort of binary pass-fail thing. And then I think that this gets into where stories are meaningful, right? Which is the philosophical stakes of the story. And to me, when you take a writing class, your high school writing teacher always loves to talk about theme. Like, what's the theme of your story? But I think that the language of theme is misleading, because what's really going on in the story, to me at least, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, is you're setting up a contest between two philosophies of life, right? And like the simplest one is like selfishness versus altruism, right? Another simple one is sort of individualism versus community, right? And you're setting up two different values, and a lot of times you're creating a contest between those two sets of values. And just in a nutshell, you, for lack of a better term, you have sort of a good set of values, let's say altruism and community in It's a Wonderful Life, right? Versus the bad values, which are selfishness and individualism. And you're just going to set up a contest between these two sets of values and have it seem at the very end that the bad values are going to prevail. Like, not only is the villain going to prevail, but the whole ethos that the villain represents is also going to prevail. And you want it to be like, it's a done deal, the hero's screwed, there's no possible way your hero can win, and then somehow, this is the pulling the rabbit out of a hat of storytelling, is you want to flip the philosophical stakes of your story and have, anyway, if you are able, you want to do, this is what the video is about, is a rapid reversal of stakes, so that you go from external failure, internal failure, and philosophical failure. A lot of times, you give your hero an epiphany. That epiphany is a flip from the philosophical failure to a philosophical success, which then leads to external failure to an external success, which then leads to a emotional failure, going from emotional failure to emotional success. It's all in the video.
One of the things I love about the endings video, too, is you talk about this dynamic between the private life and the public life. And since you brought up the antagonist or the villain, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit specifically about Richard, about Lotso in Little Miss Sunshine, in Toy Story 3, respectively, and how you are thinking about their philosophical stakes, and how that ultimately gives us a greater insight to kind of this meaning that's repressed in your hero.
Well, I'll just start with Little Miss Sunshine, which is you're setting up two sets of values. And for Richard is the philosophical antagonist of the story, and he's the guy. I mean, this is why I wrote the fucking script in the first place, was I hated this, this was years ago, and there was this whole thing about like you're voted off the island, like there's 19 losers and one winner. And I just hated that vocabulary. I hated talking
about... Again, a nod for trashy TV.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I hated that stuff, and I think that, and so I wanted to like have the dad, the character, be the philosophical antagonist, that's how he sees the world, right? And then What I figured out only like 5 years after I wrote the screenplay was the Obi-Wan Kenobi figure of the movie is actually Grandpa. And he represents an antithetical set of values, which is, what he says in the motel room scene is we're going to have fun tomorrow. We can tell them all to go to hell, right? So it doesn't matter if you win or lose. You're not a loser if you're having fun. So Olive starts out a little bit like Luke in Star Wars. Sorry for the Star Wars references, but I always do it.
You're very upset about it.
Yeah, your character is, a lot of times your hero is a little bit unformed, right? They could go either way, right? They're in the fulcrum moment in their life. So when Luke says he wants to go to Space Academy, right, his uncle Owen says, no, your only job is to make sure those condensers are working, right? And that's conversation one in the first act. Then your inciting incident happens. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. And then in the wake of your inciting incident, you have conversation two, which is with Obi-Wan. Your hero in conversation one is stuck. Hamlet is stuck in Denmark. Or the toys in Toy Story 3, they're kind of stuck. Or they have that first conversation. And they go, oh my God, Andy's growing up. Now what are you going to do? We got to go to the attic, right? Your inciting incident happens. And that turns your hero's world kind of upside down and shakes it up. And then in the wake of your inciting incident, you have conversation two. And that's the thing that makes your hero be unstuck. So Olive was, you set up your protagonist so she's torn between Richard, the dad set of stakes, which is the world is divided between winners and losers. There's two kinds of people in this world. There's winners and losers, right? And then the grandpa's worldview, right? Which is, we're going to have fun tomorrow. We can tell them all to go to hell. And so, first of all, the way you tee up the second act of that story is, and this is what I call conversation two, is Richard sits down with Olive and says,
there's no sense in entering a contest if you don't think you're going to win. So, do you think you can win, Little Miss Sunshine?
Richard.
Are you going to win?
Yes.
We're going to California.
That's a super important exchange, right? If Richard had sat down with Olive and said, Olive, we're going to drive you to this contest, but if you win, that's okay. If you lose, that's okay. We're just here to have fun, right? You wouldn't have a movie, right? It just would not, you wouldn't have the tension of that. You have to, in conversation two, you have to create this tension in your story so that when you embark on the second act, you've sort of lit the fuse on this bomb that's going to go off in the third act of the story. And then, I remember getting to this point where you have Olive backstage, and Dwayne goes backstage and says,
Mom, I don't want Olive doing this.
Oh my God.
Look around. Oh, this place is fucked. Great. Look, I don't want these people judging Olive. Fuck them.
Listen, it is too late.
No, it's not too late. You're the mom, and you're supposed to protect her. Everyone is gonna laugh at her, Mom. Please don't let her do this.
Olive Hoover, 2 minutes.
Look, she's not a beauty queen. She's just not.
And Olive overhears that, right? And then you just set up this climactic decision. Do you listen to your dad and go, there's no sense in entering a contest if you don't think you're going to win? So if Olive followed that advice, right, she would just go, you know what, I'm not going to win, so I'm not going to even try. I'm not even going to go on. Or does she, she's got Grandpa in her head like Obi-Wan Kenobi going, we can tell them, we're going to have fun tomorrow, we're going to tell them all to go to hell. And so you want to set up this climactic decision where the hero goes, I'm going to listen to the better values of the story. And a lot of times what you're doing is you're in the wake of that decision, optimally you want it to seem as though your hero is making a self-defeating choice. That oh my God, Olive is going to be humiliated. Oh my God, Luke is going to get killed by Darth Vader. Oh my God, when Ben Braddock starts rapping on the window, he's just making the whole situation worse. But because your hero commits to those values, because your hero goes, I'm going to listen to my feelings, or I'm going to listen to Obi-Wan, or I'm going to listen to what Grandpa told me one night ago, that's the thing that allows your hero to triumph. The thing is that it's not just an emotionally satisfying, it's a philosophically satisfying ending. What you are aiming for is not just emotion, but meaningful emotion at the end of your story.
I feel like I've heard you call that the global goal, and it's almost like this mantra that you're holding the tension between, this concept of beauty in Little Miss Sunshine and how that's ultimately redefined at the end. That was a beautiful representation of what Olive brought to the stage. And then in Toy Story 3, you have this concept of being there for the kid.
On Toy Story 3, God, at a certain point, I remember Andrew going, well, wait a minute, why is Lotso bad? Like, why is Lotso in our movie? Like, why is he a bad guy? Like, we can't just go, oh, he's bad, right? Like, that's sort of a mean, oh, you met a bad guy, great. Like, they're all over the place. And so we had a gazillion conversations, and what we realized was that the villain, Lotso, has to be a projection of Woody and Woody's darkest fears and insecurities. And you want to have your villain articulate, usually end of the second act, beginning of the third act, articulate to your hero's own worst fears and insecurities about themselves. So in Toy Story 3, Lotso says,
"What are y'all doing? Running back to your kid? He don't want you no more."
That's a lie.
Is it? Tell me this, Sheriff. If your kid loves you so much, why is he leaving? You think you're special, cowboy? You're a piece of plastic. You were made to be thrown away.
This is why, like, Woody can't really let go of Andy. So your villain is poking at your hero's, like, deepest vulnerability. In Up, for example, I mean, Up is so great. Oh, my God. But I always wanted Pete, it didn't end up in the final movie, but Carl Fredricksen goes through the whole movie thinking adventure is out there, and his hero is this guy, Charles Muntz, right, who has gone off and had all these adventures, and Carl Fredricksen just stayed in this one little hometown with his wife. He promised her a life adventure. He promised her that they would go have adventures, and at the end of his life, he feels like he failed Ellie, right? And I always wanted, at the beginning of the third act, or at the hinge between the second act and the third act, to have Charles Muntz turn to Carl and go, look at you. You miserable person, you never left your hometown, you never went anywhere, you never traveled, and now you're trying to have an adventure, but it's too fucking late, and fuck you, basically. But that's, you know, your villain is articulating your hero's own worst fears about themselves, right? And this is really crucial. You want the audience to go, Jesus, he's being kind of a dick about it, but he's right. Carl never left his hometown. He never really had a big adventure. And then the way you flip that is a lot of times your climax is redefining a single word. So you're redefining adventure. You know, he goes through the adventure book, and Ellie gives him the adventure book right before she dies. He goes through it. He sees all these pictures of their life, right? And he sees the final inscription that she writes, thanks for the adventure. Now go have another. What you're doing is you're redefining the meaning of adventure. That's really crucial, is you want your audience to have the same epiphany as your hero does at the exact same moment.
And I think this is brilliant because it speaks to, you know, this dichotomy between the stakes and the dichotomy between the worldview shifting, which I think gets to just the very basics of story, which is showing the way that something's changed. And I'm curious, because meaning is so important to your own writing, you know, what it is you think from a humanistic perspective that's satisfying in us, this quest for meaning.
This is a great question. You know, I spent so much of my life like watching stories and writing stories and thinking about stories that at a certain moment I just got vertigo. Like, I was just like, why am I spending my whole life? Like, why I should just go to the beach, right, and go surfing or something like that. Like, why are we sitting there like telling each other's stories all the time? And I called up my twin brother, who's a professor of literature, and I said, why do we tell stories? And he said, it's because we're ignorant. Like, we live in darkness. Like, we don't know ourselves, and we don't know the world, and we don't know the best way to live. And stories are our roadmap to finding out who we are, what the world is like, and what is the best way to live. And it's this constant negotiation, because we are ignorant of ourselves. We are ignorant of the world. We're ignorant of the best way to live. And stories are sort of our guides to that. When I was a kid, my family and I went on a hiking trip. So we drove down to the Smoky Mountains, and it was like October. And we went hiking, and like the hiking trail was pretty abandoned because it wasn't summer, it was like the fall. And we hiked about 20 miles into the Smoky Mountains. We found this campsite. My parents were like, okay, we're gonna camp here, right? And so they pitched camp, and then they're like, well, there's still like an hour and a half of daylight left. You kids go have fun. So I decided I was gonna go by myself and just keep hiking up the trail. So I kept hiking up the trail. Went about 2 miles further up the trail. And then for some reason, I can't remember why, but I left the trail and I went off to look at something, and then I came back to where I thought the trail should be, and I couldn't find it. So I kept going a little further, and I still couldn't find the trail. So then I doubled back, and I couldn't find the fucking trail. And I'm 10 years old. I'm like, I'm in the middle of the woods. I'm like, where am I? And I kept going back and forth to where I thought the trail should be, and I couldn't find it. And then I saw there was like a burn mark on a tree, and I was like, that burn mark has to mean something, right? So I went to the tree, and from that tree I could see another tree with a burn mark on it. So I went to that tree, and then from that one, I went to another one, and I was following these burn marks on this tree because it has to be leading somewhere, right? And so it was getting dark at this point, and it's cold, and I only had a t-shirt on. And then the problem was that the trees started going uphill. So the burn marks were leading from one tree to the other, but it was going uphill, and I had been walking on flat. So I felt like I'm kind of going in the wrong direction because I'm going where I think where the campfire was, but I'm going uphill. And then it kept getting steeper and steeper, and I was like, this feels like I'm not going back to where the campfire is. And at the same time, like the path became like more and more overgrown. Like I'm going through like underbrush and prickers and stuff like that. And I finally get up to this point where like the sun has gone down. It's getting cold. I'm only in a t-shirt. I'm like, oh my God, like I don't know what to do. And so I got to a point where it was like this rock face that I was going to have to crawl up, and there were all these like bushes that I was going to have to crawl through. And I was like, I'm going in the wrong direction because that's just going straight up. And I know I didn't come from wherever I'm heading, so I should just turn around and go back to where I started from. So I turned around to go back to where I started from, and I was like, if I go back there, I'm still fucked because I'm still lost, and I don't know what to do. And I just was like, I don't know what the fuck to do. And the sun is down now. It's getting colder. What am I going to do? And I looked up, and I saw, like, through the woods, I could see the moon rising through the trees. So I'm like, that's got to mean something. So I climbed up, like, this rock face through, like, all these prickers, and I got to, like, this clearing on top of the hill. And suddenly I could look down. I could see the campfire where my family was. I could see the path that I had walked down. I could see where I had left the path and got lost in the woods. And I could see the path that I had taken coming up here. And now, like, I wasn't home yet, but I could see the path home. I could see where I needed to be. And the punchline is, it's not a real story, okay? It didn't actually happen to me.
Surprise!
It's a story about storytelling, and it's a story about the nature of truth in stories, right? Which is, actors always talk about the truth in a scene, right? Lots of times your hero starts off and they're lost in the woods and they're confused and they want to get home, they want to get something. There's something that they want, but they're not quite sure how to get there or what the path is. And scene 1 is finding that first burn mark, and scene 2 is finding the second burn mark, and scene 3, scene 4, like your scenes are because A, therefore B, because B, therefore C, because C, therefore D, right? So your story is leading your character on, and there's a specific truth, right, to each tree. There's a specific truth in each scene, and that's what actors talk about. I want to find the truth of the scene. I want to find the truth of the scene. But my argument is going to be, you can't have your whole story just be going from one tree to another tree to another tree to another tree, and then you get to the final tree and that's it, right? Your story has to be going somewhere. It has to be going up to this clearing where suddenly you're not going to pay attention to the trees. You're going to see the forest instead of the trees, right? There's this sort of underlying truth where you're going to get up to a point and your hero is going to be able to see everything that led them to this point. I think that Shakespeare does this in King Lear, where your hero suddenly gets to this beautiful moment where he says to Cordelia, like, let's go to prison, and as long as we're together, like, I'll be happy with you. Like, Othello kills Desdemona, but then he has this moment of clarity where he goes, oh, my passion overthrew my reason. And I would even say, one of my favorite endings is Fellini's 8.5. I won't ruin it for the people who haven't seen it, but go watch Fellini's 8.5 because he's trying to find a coherent and unitary truth to his life, and he's getting more and more confused and more discouraged. He's going from one tree to the next, trying to find a coherent and unitary truth to his life, and at the middle of the third act, he despairs, and he goes, that's it, it's over, I'm fucked. He fails externally, he fails internally, and he fails philosophically. And then he gets to me, one of the most beautiful epiphanies in the history of movies. But it's, again, philosophically, he's gotten up to the top of this mountaintop, to this clearing, and he can look back and he can see his whole life. And I think that this speaks to the nature of truth in a story, is that your scenes all have to feel true. They all have to be true, and they all have to lead from one to another. But you have a secret agenda as a writer, right? Which is you're trying to get your audience more and more confused along with your hero, more and more not sure what the right thing to do is, the right way to go. You have a crucial moment, as I told in the story, where you go, well, maybe I'm on the wrong path. Maybe I should just go back to where I was at the beginning. Maybe I should just turn around and go back to where I started from, even though I was lost back then, right? And then you get your hero to, however you do it, this is pulling a rabbit out of a hat, you get your hero to this moment of clarity. In Shakespeare, a lot of times it's after the worst thing has already happened that your hero has this moment of clarity. But sometimes, let's just say, in 8½, like he's able to pull a rabbit out of a hat and you have your moment of clarity and then your hero gets what they want. To have a satisfying ending, you want that sense of confusion. Like, we all understand that a lot of stories are ego gratification. I want to be heavyweight champion of the world. I work and I work. I overcome obstacles, and yay, I win the prize at the end, right? And it's the same with a romantic story. I fall in love with somebody. I work and I work. I overcome obstacles. Yay, I win this person's love. But that's all ego gratification, right? The factor you're always fighting in storytelling is the so what factor. So what? He won the big contest. So what? He got the pretty girl, or she got the handsome guy. So what, right? The thing that's going to make your ending satisfying, right, is to give you is either to have that thing where you're flipping the philosophical stakes to your story to make it feel meaningful, or just giving your hero this moment of clarity that's going to feel universal if you play your cards right.
I've heard you quote Robert McKee regarding the role of meaning in storytelling, and particularly how the more meaning that you have in a story, the more emotional it will all be. And as you're talking about how you kind of lead us through the woods and we're getting more and more confused, how you kind of find your way to that moment of clarity or flip the philosophical stakes without like beating us on the head about it. And if you can give examples.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. And I've never talked about this before, but this is one of my favorite little stories, is that George Lucas once said, he goes, it's easy to produce emotion in a story. You just throw a puppy on the freeway and your audience will have an emotional reaction.
I'm having one right now.
And I thought about that and I was like, yes, that's true, but it's a little facile. And I thought about it some more and I was like, there's 3 ways that you can produce emotion with that scenario, right? The first way is the little puppy walks accidentally out on the freeway and now he's out on the freeway, right? And you're gonna be like, oh, fucking shit, like the little puppy's gonna get killed by a car, but you're also a little annoyed because it was random happenstance, right? And your puppy's gonna get killed needlessly because it was stupid enough to walk out on the freeway. So that's emotion, but it's sort of bad and meaningless emotion. The second way is your villain can come along, pick up the puppy by the scruff of the neck and throw it on the freeway. And now your puppy's on the freeway and they're about to be killed, but you're still like, oh, the puppy is sort of like, I want the puppy to survive, but he's just a victim of the villain's actions. You have an antagonist-driven story. The antagonist is driving how that scene happens. The third option is little Timmy is across the highway and little Timmy is getting in the moving van and about to take off and go 3,000 miles away, and the little puppy is on the other side of the freeway and he's like, if I'm gonna stay with little Timmy, if I love little Timmy, I have to make the choice to go out on the freeway and get to little Timmy. And that's a more satisfying kind of emotion, right? And so again, like, it's the same scenario, but the reason that your puppy ends up on the freeway, right? You're going to be able to provoke emotion, but it's a better emotion. It's not random. It's not antagonist driven. It's actually your hero making the choice to do something difficult for something meaningful that they're pursuing.
I'm curious what writing does for you in your own attempt to search for meaning.
The cliche is you write to find out what you think, and I think that there's a real value to that and a real pleasure. There's also a real pleasure just in first drafts. To me, the first draft is the most fun part of writing. It's like when everything is still vapor and everything is still moving. I'm working on a first draft right now, and it's so much fun because I can change anything. I can go anywhere. I can do whatever I want. And you also feel like you're definitely making progress, right? When I won the Oscar for Little Miss Sunshine, I was invited by NYU to give they called me up and they're like, we want you to do a commencement address. And I was like, oh, you mean for the School of the Arts? And they're like, no, for the whole school. And I was like, oh, how many people? And they're like, it's 25,000, it's gonna be in Madison Square Garden. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm not gonna do that. But that kind of haunted me because I was like, I don't know what to tell like a young person. Like, the path to Little Miss Sunshine and the path to winning an Oscar was so fraught, and it's so, like, not everyone's gonna be able to win an Oscar, right? And so I can't get up there in front of everybody and go, here's how you win an Oscar. Like, that feels like, that's the tradition of commencement speeches, is right? You have one successful person get up and go, here's my story, And I thought, oh, that's kind of bullshit. And then I was kind of haunted for years about, like, what should I tell people, And I remember getting back from working on Star Wars and coming back to New York, and I really thought about it for a long time. And maybe this is trite, but what I finally came up with was, I wanted to write a story about a guy who wanted to be an artist, and the way he was going to escape from the jaws of capitalism was to become an artist. And he was like, an artist is free. An artist like exists outside of the marketplace. I'm just going to like be an artist and like escape from the jaws of capitalism, basically. And through the course of the story, you just beat your hero down, beat your hero down, beat your hero down. And then like this character's hero is like a Banksy figure, right? And he finally tracks down this guy Banksy. I'll never write the script, so. But his hero goes, you know what? You think art is an escape from the marketplace, but actually art exists in the marketplace. And in fact, art is the worst part of the marketplace because you're just making useless shit for rich people to buy. And no, wait. And so you think that like art is this ladder out of being trapped in this world of capitalism, this world of transactions and exchanges. And that's your hero's moment of despair. I've been fucked. I've been an idiot my whole life. I've been so naive. Like, what am I going to do? And then again, you want to create this reversal. And the reversal, which I really believe, I actually believe, I confess, is that I realize, art is not a subset of commerce. That commerce is a subset of art. And that if we approach our lives and approach ourselves as a work of art, right? Like running a business is itself an art. The way you write a letter to a friend is an art. The way you make a cup of tea, the way you dress, like everything is an art. And that's something that you can tell people because the creation of the self as a work of art is the thing that's democratically accessible to everybody, right? And I think that the world wants you to think that you're a machine that's doing maximum productivity, or the world, social media wants you to think that you're a product and you're selling yourself. But my argument is you're not a machine, you're not a weapon, you're not a product, you are a work of art and you are creating yourself in the image of your ideal. So that was... But to answer your question, that was something that I wrestled with for years and years, trying to figure that out. And it was only thinking about this screenplay about this guy who wanted to go to art school and be an artist that made me figure that out and solve the problem that I had, with the whole NYU commencement speech.
I mean, cool, but how do we win an Oscar?
What I did was I got a job reading screenplays and I read about 1,000 screenplays. And then I wrote 11 screenplays before I sold Little Miss Sunshine. I was 34 and a half. I'd been writing for 10 years. Nothing had happened. I didn't have an agent. I didn't have a producer. I was unemployed. And I sat down and wrote Little Miss Sunshine. So, it was a lot of failure, disappointment, and 10 years of failure, disappointment, and suffering. And actually, you know what? The fact that I went through 10 years of failure and disappointment and suffering is what allowed me to write Little Miss Sunshine. Like, if I had gotten out of film school and had a hit right away, I would have never in a million years written that script. And it was only my painful ordeal of disappointment and humiliation that led me to write this thing that was attacking the whole notion of winners and losers.
I'm curious about that. I went to a panel yesterday on resilience, and that feels like such an important thing that we need to hold as writers, is kind of moving through. I mean, you wrote 100 drafts of Little Miss Sunshine, and then just working with the Pixar Brain Trust. I know that that's grueling, for lack of a better word, and took 3 years just to kind of do that script. I mean, what have you gleaned from your personal creative process and practice to kind of have the momentum to keep going?
If I could give one bit of advice to my younger self, I feel like I used to torture myself I'd write a script and I'd write like 3 drafts of the script, right? And you get to the 3rd draft and you're like, okay, this is pretty good. And then I'd be like, okay, the next draft it will be my final draft. I'll solve all the problems and like I'll just do one more draft and then I'll be done, right? And then you turn it in and there's still problems. So you go, okay, the next one, it'll be the 5th draft. I'll solve all the problems and I'll be done, right? And then, okay, it'll be the next draft. And you're setting yourself up for disappointment and I feel like I drove myself crazy trying to, with each draft, solve every problem in the whole screenplay. So now, this is speaking to resilience and persistence, I just automatically budget 20 drafts for everything I'm working on. You're not trying to solve every problem all at once. You can get to, draft 11, draft 12, and someone's going to say to you, I'm not tracking your main relationship. The main relationship is confusing. it's jagged, it doesn't make sense, and you go, okay, I'm going to do a new draft, but I don't care about anything else. All I'm going to focus on is making that main relationship work. Or, your hero's epiphany, like you're going to be tracking the philosophical stakes of your story. Or you can do a humor pass. You go, you know what, this should be a lot funnier. I'm just going to go through the script one scene at a time. I'm going to add one funny thing to every scene in the movie. And to get something that has the clarity and simplicity and sort of organic inevitability of a good story is really hard, and it takes a long time. So my thing is, start off with a realistic view of how hard what you're trying to do is, how much effort it's going to take. My joke was when I wrote Little Miss Sunshine, it was like me lighting off a little homemade rocket in my backyard, and then when I went to work at Pixar, it was like going to NASA all of a sudden. They're like, yeah, we're making rockets too, but we have a different way of doing it. But I'll just say it was 3 years, like writing Toy Story 3 was like 3 years of me and like 10 other people. So it was like 30 man years of labor to get a 93-minute movie made. And I think that like that, at the end, it feels like a miracle of storytelling because it's this very organic, falling forward sense of direction and momentum to your story. But we made that film in a rough form like 7 or 8 times before we went to final animation, and it was a long and very difficult process. So anyway, for persistence, just don't be naive about how difficult the task of writing a great screenplay is.
I'm curious about this difference between working with original material versus IP. You broke the story for Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Obviously, Toy Story 3 has this beautiful legacy and whole community behind it. And you talk a lot in your endings lecture about kind of working backwards rather than forward writing. Is that still your process? Is that kind of specific to what the actual project is? And this is all me kind of teeing you up to put quarters in the machine for first acts. I think you said every great ending starts in the beginning.
Oh, in the first act. Yeah, I think that just in terms of like where ideas come from, I gave the example of Little Miss Sunshine. I started with the ending. And I think that for me at least, like usually your story starts with like one specific moment in your movie. So Little Miss Sunshine started with the ending. I have another script that I really started with the midpoint. There was like a handshake deal between these two characters at the midpoint. I'm like, that's such a funny handshake deal. It's so funny, I gotta tell you, that I was like, I'm gonna build out the rest of the story around this midpoint. I have another script that is about like it's all based on the inciting incident. It's like you show up at work one day and the worst possible thing happens, and then what happens after that. And so I think that you generally start with just one single moment, and you guys know what this is like, right? You have a character, you have sort of a vague idea for a character, a vague idea for a world, like you're trying to figure this out. But I do feel like what I'll do then, and I did this on Little Miss Sunshine, was I'll sit down and I'll just do a one-page chart of your opening, your inciting incident, your first act break, your midpoint, your second act break, your climax, and then the ending. And you can just put that on one page. And I like when someone gives me a script, that's how I'll analyze it. Like I will read the script and I'll just go, okay, opening, inciting incident, first act break, midpoint, second act break, climax. And I think that there's a symmetry to storytelling, right? So your first image, the very beginning, is often echoed by the final image. Your inciting incident, the things that you're putting at stake in your inciting incident are the things that's going to get paid off 80 pages later in your climax. And then your first act break is inevitably going to lead to is going to either pay off or fail to get paid off in your second act break. You don't have to always do it this way, right? There's a million different ways of telling a story. And I think that I actually had a chart at the first act's lecture where it was like, the hardest thing to do in storytelling is have a sympathetic and active character, right? It's easy to write an unsympathetic character. We've all done it before. And it's easy to write a passive character. It's hard to write an active character, someone who's relentlessly pursuing a goal, and it's hard to make that person super sympathetic. So to me, that's like the up and to the right green spot that we're all shooting for, is maximum sympathy and maximum activity. And I think that tends to get kicked off at the first act break of the story. The example I always go to is Finding Nemo, right? First of all, he lost his whole family. He lost all his children except for one little egg. He went and picked up this one little egg. He said, I promise I will protect you. Nothing bad will ever happen to you. Cut to 5 years later, he's this overprotective helicopter parent who's trying to do everything he can to protect his son. He's so obsessed with protecting his son that he's alienating his son. His son is like being driven crazy by his dad's overprotectiveness. You get to the end of the first act, and Nemo says, "I hate you, Dad." Turns around to prove his independence, swims out to the boat, right? Gets captured and taken away, right? And now you've established externally what's at stake is Nemo going to live or die? But internally, emotionally, you're going, oh, there's been a rupture in this relationship between the parent and child, and now we're rooting for that rupture to be healed. And then blah, 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 philosophically, you're dealing with, how are you a good parent? Is it that you protect your child no matter what, or do you allow them to take reasonable risks? That's what's philosophically at stake in the story. But at that moment, well, the first act break is actually not Nemo getting captured, right? Because in the wake of Nemo getting captured, Marlin doesn't know what to do. He's like, oh my God, I'll never see my son again. It's only when he goes down to the bottom of the ocean, he finds the little snorkeling mask that says 12 Wallaby Ways, Sydney, Australia, that now he's like, that's where my son is. And what your hero at that moment says is, I will run through brick walls. I will risk everything to get to 12 Wallaby Ways, Sydney, Australia. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if I live or die. I'm going to do everything in my power to get to 12 Wallaby Way in Sydney, Australia. That's a good first act break because it's so powerful. Like everything has been set up. You have this like strong rooting interest. Externally, you don't want to see Nemo die, but also internally, you want to see the father-son thing healed. And I think that like it's just more and more I feel like I used to think that the most important moment in your story was the ending, because the ending is where you get to the clearing on the mountaintop moment, right? And that's where the meaning of your story is revealed. It's where your emotional payoff happens. But I've come to believe that actually the most important moment in your story is your first act break, because when you think about a story and the way you describe a story in like 2 sentences, like the little TV guide synopsis, it usually is inciting incident and first act break. So, for example, when a farm girl from Kansas gets swept away by a tornado, inciting incident, she embarks down the yellow brick road to see the wizard to get home to Kansas. First act break, right? Or when a little girl wins the last minute spot in a child beauty pageant, inciting incident, her whole family has to get into a VW bus to go get her to this pageant. That's your first act break. So your first act break is kind of what your elevator pitch is. It's kind of what your whole story is about. And I see over and over again, I see first act breaks that are not as strong as they should be. And I think that the thing is that first act breaks are deceiving, because if you have an ending and your ending doesn't work, like everybody kind of knows, like a 4-year-old kid can go, oh, that ending was so predictable, it was so trite. Like a 4-year-old kid can tell you have a bad ending. If you have a weak first act break, it's pretty invisible. Like people don't see that a first act break has not done all the work it needs to do. If I had written Little Miss Sunshine, and Richard had said, Olive, we're going to go to this pageant, but we just want to have fun. It doesn't matter if you win or lose. We're going to get in and let's go. Like you take all the air out of that story. Like you take all the tension out of that story. And what's going to happen is you're going to get into your second act. You're going to get 10 minutes into your second act. We all know this feeling, right? You have a great, entertaining first act. Your hero goes off to pursue whatever they're pursuing. You get 10 minutes into your second act and you go, okay, wait a minute, what am I rooting for? What am I supposed to care about? Like what's at stake? And your story starts to meander and lose focus and lose momentum. And so again, I was obsessed with endings, but now more and more I feel like the most important moment in your story is your first act break.
Do you write for fun?
I write for fun, but I won't start a project until I know what the ending is going to be. Like, and I won't start a first draft. Like I'll play around with ideas. But I made the mistake of, this was my gothic horror story. It had an A+ first act. It was so great. And everyone who read the first act, like, this is great. But I didn't know what the ending, when I started writing it, I didn't know what the ending was. Like, I'll figure it out when I get there. And I got to the ending and I couldn't figure it out. And I put that script aside for 20 years because I couldn't figure it out. And after that, that was a script I wrote before Little Miss Sunshine. And that was why I was like, I'm never going to write another script until I know what the ending is. And that's why I was like, I'm going to look for an ending and then reverse engineer the story. So me solving the question of like, how should you live your life? Do you aspire to success? Do you aspire to be productive? Do you aspire to be an alluring product? Are you a product or a machine? And then coming to the idea, no, you're a self-created work of art that needs to be authentic to yourself, right? That was I guess that's my idea of fun. That's me exploring, but it's a very internal thing. And it's not me sitting down with a piece of paper and sketching it all out. It's just this gnawing thing that's going on in the back of your mind. 99% of writing is thinking. And you should not be embarrassed if you are lying on the floor thinking. And even if you're stuck and you are not writing, you are still writing. My favorite metaphor for mental effort is you're trying to open the jar of peanut butter and the fucking lid is stuck on so tight that you can't open it. And you're turning and hitting it on the counter and running it under the hot water and it's still not opening. And you feel like you're not making any progress. You feel like all the work you've done hasn't led anywhere because the lid is still on the jar of peanut butter. But at a certain point, we all know this feeling. You turn it and it starts moving and then boom, it comes up. And you get that little burst of vacuum sealing that comes out. But if you hadn't made all that effort, if you hadn't tried all that time, seemingly fruitlessly, seemingly without result, right, you wouldn't have opened the jar, right? So I think a lot of times it's a nonlinear process. And just going back, I'm going to tie this back to why do we tell stories? Why do we spend our lives writing stories, telling stories, consuming stories? Is because we live in darkness. We live in ignorance. We don't understand ourselves. We don't understand the world. We don't understand how we should live. And writing is our path to that sort of understanding of the world, of ourselves, and how to live. The end.
Michael Arndt, everybody.
On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Kleberg Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story is also brought to you by Bogle Family Vineyards, 6th-generation farmers and 3rd-generation winemakers, based in Clarksburg, California. Makers of sustainably grown wines that are a reflection of their family values since 1968. The project is supported in part by the Texas Commission on the Arts. This show is produced by myself, Barbara Morgan, Elizabeth Mims, and Emily Locke. Our associate producer is Freya Nealer, and our editor is Anna Kolarova. Music is by Brian Ramos. Copywriting by Mazzy Smallwood. Production assistance comes from Dennis Moniger, Travis Kennedy Sound, Phil Mazzetti, and KUT 90.5 in Austin. Go to austinfilmfestival.com to learn more about Austin Film Festival and Conference each October. Until next time, I'm Barbara Morgan, and this has been Austin Film Festival's On Story.